Hi there, let's just get to it. If you have watched the discussion between Ian Collins and former Scotland Yard Superintendent Nusrit Mehtab, most likely you would have reached for the bucket to throw up. I'm assuming you survived the full 15 minutes without throwing your shoe at the television or laptop screen to smack her miserable face. Congratulations. I'll only be dissecting the cultural and historical lies she mentioned. Firstly, what these rape gangs are doing is 100% Islamic culture.
Going on here?
100% culture doesn't come into it. There's no culture that says you can abuse children.
No, but there isn't a culture that says it, but there's a culture that might believe it, that might believe, we're superior to you, you're white trash. Many of the victims said they were.
Quran chapter 3 verse 110, and I quote, "You are the best community ever raised for humanity. You encourage good, forbid evil, and believe in Allah." Had the people of the book believed, it would have been better for them. Some of them are faithful, but most are rebellious.
Going on here?
100% culture doesn't come into it. There's no culture that says you can abuse children.
No, but there isn't a culture that says it, but there's a culture that might believe it, that might believe, we're superior to you, you're white trash. Many of the victims said they were referred to that on a regular basis. This was racism and race hate on a big scale, right?
Yeah. When I've listened to and read the testimonies of the victims, and it breaks my heart that any child, regardless of had to go through that. But no one culture or one religion says that you can treat that. These are criminal predators.
True.
Narrated by Aisha. I used to play with the dolls in the presence of the Prophet, and my girlfriends also used to play with me. When Allah's messenger used to enter my dwelling place, they used to hide themselves, but the Prophet would call them to join and play with me. The playing with the dolls and similar images is forbidden. But it was allowed for Aisha at that time, as she was a little girl, not yet reached the age of puberty. Narrated by Aisha. That the Prophet married her when she was 6 years old, and he consummated his marriage when she was 9 years old. And then she remained with him for 9 years, till his death. As for your women past the age of menstruation, in case you do not know, their waiting period is 3 months, and those who have not menstruated as well. As for those who are pregnant, their waiting period ends with delivery. And whoever is mindful of Allah, He will make their matters easy for them. Most girls get their first period when they're around 12. But sometimes it comes a few years earlier or later. Every girl's body has its own schedule. There isn't one right age for a girl to get her period. But signs to watch for include breasts starting to develop. Periods usually start about 2 years after this. Hair growing under a girl's arms and in her private parts. Seeing or feeling vaginal discharge fluid, sort of like mucus, which usually begins about 6 months to a year before a girl gets her first period. In context. The Quran chapter on divorce. This chapter mentions how a Muslim man must treat his wife upon divorce. When he can and cannot have sex with her. How he must part with her. It also states if she is menstruating or not. Quran verses 65.2 and 65.3 discuss that in detail. The medical term for the absence of a menstrual period is amenorrhea. Quran verse 65.4 mentions girls who have not menstruated, in other words a child. A child does not menstruate till she reaches puberty. This concludes that Islam allows a grown man to have sex with a child. How does all this fit in with grooming rape gangs? Let's take a look at the verse from the Quran which allows abduction. Chapter 4 verse 24, and I quote, "Also forbidden are married women, except female captives in your possession. This is Allah's commandment to you. Lawful to you are all beyond these, as long as you seek them with your wealth in a legal marriage, not in fornication. Give those you have consummated marriage with their due dowries. It is permissible to be mutually gracious regarding the set dowry. Surely Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. End quote. So, as you can see, the Quran clearly allows females to be captured as sex slaves, in other words war booty, and you can do whatever you like. And I quote, "In 1971, the Pakistan Army began a brutal crackdown against Bengalis in which hundreds of thousands of women were detained and repeatedly brutalized. Only now are their stories beginning to be told." But Jahan was about to become a victim of another brutal tactic of the Pakistani army. Alongside the killings, soldiers carried out a violent campaign of mass rape against Bengali women and girls, in what many historians believe amounted to a direct policy under Khan's command to impregnate as many women as possible with the blood from the West. End quote.
Give it that label. You know, Ian, it's despicable. And the 3% of the men in Rotherham, in Telford, in Rochdale were of Pakistani origin. Nobody's denying that. I'm not denying that. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying it's right. And actually, they're a stain on to put them down and say, oh, actually, they're Muslims and Pakistani. Their origins are, but they're a stain on the religion of Islam. They're a stain on I'm ashamed to associate myself with them and be, you know, the fact that they are of Pakistani heritage. So let's move away from that. It's wrong what they did. You cannot blame the whole culture. Yes,
No,
you
of
might
course.
have to look at, but if you look at the population of Rochdale or Rotherham, a disproportionately high number of Pakistani
of course.
people that live in there.
I would like to think most sensible people wouldn't for one second think that, you know, you're a woman of Pakistani heritage. Nobody would think, oh yeah, Nusrit secretly, she's okay with it. I don't think any sensible person would really think that. But I mean, if you take sort of cultural divide to its extreme, you know, over there in parts of the Middle East where ISIS will happily burn somebody for being a non-believer or for being gay, you'd be as guilty as a Westerner, forget your own heritage, you'd be as guilty as me in their eyes, etc. That's because they happen to believe they are better people because of their background, their faith and their culture. This is the sort of thing that's gone on, isn't it? It's people who have an intrinsic belief that these people are worthless because they're white women, white girls, white kids.
I believe that these men saw the vulnerabilities in these girls. They saw the vulnerability in the system that didn't protect them, and they knew that they wouldn't be taken seriously. Epstein did the same thing. He targeted young working class girls who came from broken homes and abused them. And so it's the same thing. These are master manipulators. It's not the culture. It's the predators that you need to look at. And I still do not believe and will not agree, and we'll have to disagree on this, that it's the whole culture that teaches this. You know,
but no, I agree with that. I don't think anybody thinks that with a brain. Nobody thinks the whole culture of Islam or Pakistan preaches that. There will be some components.
Goes on to say that it is not Pakistani or Islamic culture. In 1971, 400,000 women were raped by the Pakistani Muslim army. Let's take a look at some Islamic history and dig deeper into their prophets' deeds. Juwayriyah was the 8th wife of Muhammad. Juwayriyah was previously married and had her own riches, tribe, and was happy. Muhammad killed Juwayriyah's husband in battle. He slaughtered her tribe and took her as a sex slave. Originally, Muhammad gave Juwayriyah away as war booty prize to his friends. His friend Thabit and his cousins were both gifted with Juwayriyah. They utilized Juwayriyah like a sex toy, using and abusing her for many nights and days, violating her. One day, Juwayriyah, fed up of her miserable life, asks Muhammad to spare her from her grief. Muhammad gave her the offer of marrying her and to set her free from slavery. Lucky her. Juwayriyah ended up marrying Muhammad and converted to Islam. She truly hit the jackpot now. This poor woman, who lost her dignity, honor, husband, marriage, family, and friends. Today Muslims count Juwayriya as a blessed soul, since Muhammad uplifted her by marrying her. Muhammad is the mongrel that put her in that situation in the first place. Another dastardly deed, twisted into some sick love fantasy by Muslims, is the marriage between Muhammad and Safiyyah. Safiyyah was a Jewish woman and a newlywed bride, and her husband had been killed in battle by Muhammad. Firstly, Safiyyah is given away to Muhammad's men as a war booty sex slave toy. Then, as Muhammad's lust grew for Safiyyah, she became his wife and converted to Islam. So, again we can see that Muslims play pass the parcel with captives as sex toys. It's quite strange that Muhammad's collection of wives were war booty prizes. And I quote, "The Prophet bought Safiyyah for 7 slaves." From Dihyah Kalbi. End quote. And, this part here, Muhammad takes his war captive sex slave as his wife. And I quote, "The Muslims asked whether Safiyyah would be considered as his wife or as a slave girl of what his right hands possessed. Then they said, if the Prophet screens her from the people, then she is the Prophet's wife, but if he does not screen her, then she is a slave girl. So when the Prophet proceeded, he made a place for her, on the camel, behind him and screened her from people." End quote. Conclusion. So, we can see from the facts that Islamic and Pakistani culture allows sexual slavery. Islam allows sex with a child. Islam allows rape and abduction of female war captives. Muhammad is the role model. Muhammad also stated that a Muslim thief, rapist and adulterer will attain paradise for simply being Muslim, a follower of Allah. In other words, non-Muslims who reject Allah despite their good deeds are worthless in Islam. And I quote, Sahih al-Bukhari 12:37. Narrated Abdur-Rahman, Allah's Messenger said, "Someone came to me from my Lord and gave me the news, or good tidings, that if any of my followers dies worshipping none, in any way along with Allah, he will enter paradise." I asked, even if he committed illegal sexual intercourse, adultery, and theft. He replied, even if he committed illegal sexual intercourse, adultery, and theft. End quote. Islam has no respect for non-Muslims. Those who reject the Quran and Islam are punished. Quran chapter 4 verse 56. And I quote, "Surely those who reject our signs, we will cast them into the fire. Whenever their skin is burnt completely, we will replace it so they will constantly taste the punishment. Indeed, Allah is Almighty, All-Wise." End quote. Now, debunking her Islamic Golden Age nonsense.
In that group, however, that have a very medieval way of looking at Westerners, and that's clearly what's going on.
Well, you know, I mean, it's interesting because I think it was Mr. Jenrick that used this, you know, called my heritage or Pakistani heritage, called these people medieval. Well, can I just say that while he's referring to Islam, saying that this heritage, Pakistani or Muslims, are medieval, can I just say that Islam introduced medicine, it introduced universities, culture, art. So when we talk about medieval and use those terms, it's offensive.
But I don't think he did single out Pakistan or Islam. He said there are people. He said there are people that. Yeah, he said.
Nusrit said, Islam introduced medicine, universities, culture and art. Oh, really? Muhammad was known for being illiterate. So what did he contribute? Knowledge flowed into the Islamic world from Greece, Persia, India, and many other places. Al-Kindi 801 to 873 was an Islamic mathematician who wrote on the Indian number system as well as geometry and optics. Ibn Khaldun 1332 to 1395 said, "The Arabs received science from the Indians." British scientist Joseph Needham 1900 to 1995 who spoke about the world's first university Taxila, stated, and I quote, "When the men of Alexander the Great came to Taxila in India in the 4th century BC, they found a university there the like of which had not then been seen in Greece." End quote. These are just a few examples. And, finally,
Inshallah, after you hear my answer, your view will completely change on the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It is very clearly mentioned in Sahih Bukhari, volume number 5, hadith number 3896, that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he contracted the marriage with Aisha radiallahu anha at the age of 6, and he consummated the marriage after she had completed the age of 9. And this information is also repeated in Sahih Muslim and various Sahih Hadith. There is no iota of doubt that yes, the Prophet did contract the marriage at the age of 6 with Aisha radiallahu anha. She was the daughter of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, the first caliph of Islam. And after contracting the marriage, she lived with her father. And after she attained puberty, there's a hadith that says after she attained puberty, then she consummated the marriage. She went with the Prophet and stayed with him and consummated